still tonight, and thank you so much for being here. Over the past several weeks, I've heard many comments both in favor of and opposed to the proposed detention pond basin near Heather Hill Elementary School. The purpose of the basin is to help mitigate decades-long flooding in our village. And while we all agree, and many have personally seen and experienced, that flooding is an issue at the Flossmoor Road Viaduct and along Berry Lane and adjacent streets, we are not in agreement on how to solve the problem. This was made especially apparent by a divided 4-3 vote by the Board of Trustees at its April 15th meeting. As a civil engineer, I understand that when presented with a problem such as flooding that affects an entire community, it is imperative that we find a viable solution. As mayor, I want that solution to be something that the majority, if not all, of elected officials and decision makers can confidently stand behind. The current solution, which has been approved by this board, was recommended and designed by Baxter and Woodman Consulting Engineers after numerous iterations that considered state regulations and local concerns. This plan is the second phase of a project that was substantially completed in the fall of 2022 on Berry Lane. This phase includes the construction of a large-scale storm sewer that will run from the viaduct to Heather Hill site, where a naturalized detention basin would be constructed. The goal of the project is to alleviate flooding in the Berry Lane project area and the village's treasured downtown, where community services such as our public library and public transportation reside, along with valued and unique business districts where over 80% of our business owners are minority and or women-owned businesses that breathe life and vitality into our downtown. While already approved and ready to go to bid, I was surprised and concerned that a project that had had full board support less than a year ago had a 4-3 vote last meeting. In addition, I have heard from many of you at meetings on the phone and online, and I hear and respect your opinions. In response, I have paused the next steps of this project, circled back around to funding sources and landowners, and have asked our staff to investigate a potential alternative. The alternative will cost more money and additional funding would need to be identified, but if there is a solution that has more board support, we should further pursue it in hopes that it can be achieved. The alternative would be presented to our Board of Trustees tonight by Public Works Director John Brunke, and following his presentation, I will invite the board to have an open discussion on the option. The board will then be asked to make some decisions for the greater good of the community. The last vote on this issue at our April 15th meeting resulted in a 3-3 split where I had to make the deciding vote. To be clear, should the board not have a majority consensus for the direction of this project will not move forward, and we will direct our time and our resources to other areas. Welcome to Public Works Director John Crump. Thank you so much, and with him tonight is Matt Moffett, a design engineer from Baxter & Woodman.
Long-time flooding problem for the village. We can all agree on that in the room today, I'm sure. We did have the 2020 referendum that helped support majority of the funding for the project, and the current proposal has residents concerned and a divided board with the issue. The first thing I want to go over is the current project proposal, which is the Heather Hill Basin. Most of you have probably seen this illustration of the proposed basin behind Heather Hill Elementary School. The next project would involve a storm sewer from the viaduct to the Heather Hill site, as Mayor Nelson mentioned, with the naturalized detention basin at the project site. The project will take the risk of uncontrolled flooding from a high traffic area and put it in a controlled environment. Basin would be dry approximately 99% of the time, filled with tall native grasses and plants, and enclosed with secure fencing. Synopsis overview of this option. The cost is approximately $7.8 million. Nearly $4 million of this cost is being covered with grants that have already been secured. Protection, this would provide a 10-year protection level for the viaduct and 10-year protection level for the Berry Lane project area for the roadways. Challenges though on this option are resident concerns over safety and the location of the basin behind the school. The first alternate we looked at to the proposed project as it sits today is to do an underground storage reservoir at the Heatherville site with probably like a storm trap type underground concrete storage vault. With that kind of project, we would basically have this detention underground under the existing site. We'd have to remove the soil, construct the vault system, and put it back in place. We could still do drainage improvements on the school site to help with their marshy field, and also some drainage issues around the school itself. And the tennis courts could be placed back over this detention system, and we wouldn't have to purchase the property. We could get an easement potentially if it was approved by the HF Park District. So that's something to keep in mind. Going over the cost, it still would be $7.8 million plus the cost of the underground detention system. They looked at two options. One, doing the whole system is roughly $4.4 million additional money for a full system. If we wanted to look at a half system underground, which would be like the northern half of the proposed basin around the playground, and the bigger area, the north, that would be underground, and then we could still have a open basin if cost was an issue, and that was a decision of the board. They wanted to pursue that, they could. And that would be about $2.5 million more on top of the project cost. Protection levels are still the same, 10-year for the viaduct and for Berry Lane. Challenges for this alternative would be we would have to identify additional funding for the project to help cover that $2.5 to $4.5 million additional. We would potentially have to renew our current grants that we have in place with the DCO, and that's not a guaranteed thing, but it could be done. We would have to update the intergovernmental agreements with both the school district and go through review processes again, and also with the park district. There will be minor engineering fees to design the system because that's outside the scope of the current project. And the resident concerns should go away. If it was a full basin, we would estimate, but if it was a partial option, we think there still would be resident concerns about an open basin for a part of the basin. If there was an open section that was still the dry basin behind the school, but then the underground portion to the north end. Alternate two, they looked at doing an underground basin under the south commuter line. There's a couple things involved with this project where there would be just an underground basin under the south commuter lot for the viaduct, and it would require a pumping station and a generator. I probably should let Matt talk more about it from Baxter Woman here, but basically the viaduct water would flow of gravity into the underground basin under the parking lot, but we would need a lift station or pump station to pump the water out of it because it would have to be lowered and get it to a gravity sewer that drains from the area, and potentially have to run some gravity sewer, I would assume, in the cost figure. The total cost of that project would be estimated at $12 million. It would provide 10-year protection for the viaduct, but challenges with this would be obviously additional funding needed on top of what we have for a $7.8 million project today. Renewable grants, ongoing pump station maintenance, which is not cheap, additional engineering fees to change scope on that. But this also would not further benefit the Berry Lane project area. Right now, with the current project that was built on Berry Lane, they have a 5-year protection level on the roadway. To get to the 10-year protection level, we would need to do a detention basin at Heatherville to benefit that area. In this alternate south lot, they would not be connected to this basin because I don't believe there's space support, and getting it there would not be an option we want to consider for cost. And there's not space enough for a big enough basin there, so it would have to be a basin just for the viaduct, which is the reason for the lower cost at $12 million. Alternate three, Flossmoor Park underground basin. This would be doing a similar underground detention basin that we were looking at South Commuter Lot, and doing it under the Flossmoor Park area. That would be very similar to that option where we have an underground storage vault for the viaduct only. And a pump station and generator. That is also estimated at $12 million, 10-year protection level for the viaduct. And the same challenges as the previous option, other than it would be an impact to the Flossmoor baseball and softball fields, or on the south fields at least, for one construction season, because we would lose that field for a year if we have to take the park out, basically install a base and then put the park back and rebuild the fields. And this would also not help the Berry Lane project area because it would only be for the viaduct. And alternate 4, abandon the project entirely, not do anything. Nobody likes to talk that way, but it's, that, doing nothing is an option. So you do have to at least, know that. It's not something any of us, I think, would want to consider, but it is an option. And that would basically, if we did abandon the project, we would have to redirect already awarded grants to other projects if it was possible, and the legislators that awarded those would allow us to do that. Certain grants that we got through the ECU already are specific to the viaducts, we would have to go back and lobby to redirect that funding. Synopsis and review of a do-nothing option, loss of engineering fees to date, we've already spent a little over $200,000 on engineering on the project. Potential loss of $4 million in grants if they can't be redirected. Additional funding for street rehabilitation program would actually be a positive in that scenario because the money that's sitting there for the viaduct could go towards street rehab to the tune of approximately $5 million. It would
$5 million for the streets?
I'm not.
$5 million for the streets?
Yeah, $5 million for streets.
It was a $10 million GO, wasn't it? That's what we took out.
Can you finish, please?
So protection level in the existing scenario, if we do nothing, we're at a 1-year protection level for the viaduct. Challenges, continuation of flooding problems, obviously, for the residential area in Heather Hill and businesses downtown in the Central Business District. Risk of losing already awarded grant funds, uncontrolled stormwater, public safety risk for the viaduct continues, and potential loss of local economy if businesses get flooded and don't come back. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
John, this is if we do nothing, the final synopsis.
Yes.
Yeah.
If we do nothing, we have a 1-year protection for the project.
That's what we have right now, yes, in an existing condition. If we do nothing further than what, nothing's been done by it today.
Thank you, and Village Manager Wachtel had a few other things to add.
Sure, I want to provide a couple of summary comments and then also talk about the subject of arbitrage that came up at the last village board meeting. So I think it's important to note that all of these options had at one point in time over the last couple of years been identified as options for the village to consider. They're not the most cost-effective option. As you heard tonight, they all cost more than what we've been talking about up until this point. And furthermore, we don't have the funding to be able to do any of those options as they exist today, except for the one that's been proposed. Any additional options will require us to identify grant funds and be able to successfully pursue them in order to pursue any of these options that we talked about this evening. In addition to that, all of that will take more time, and with more time comes the risk of the project costing more. It also means that the second phase of street rehabilitation that we're anticipating being able to do with the remaining bond monies will be further delayed as well. There was some talk at the last board meeting about the impact of arbitrage on the bond proceeds, and I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about that. It is a requirement once you've passed 3 years and have not spent 85% of the bond proceeds, but it is not an obstacle or penalty to the village. And in fact, after having our finance manager and myself had a meeting with our bond council to talk further about that, they're seeing the requirement to go through this calculation, this exercise. Very common these days. Projects are being delayed due to supply chain issues and other kind of every bond has its own story, but it's not uncommon to have to go through this, and it's a requirement after 3 years if you haven't spent 85% of the proceeds. It's also a requirement after 5 years of holding on to the bond monies. And what it means is it's a calculation of our measured investment returns and whether or not they'll be greater than the weighted bond yield, which was established at the time of the bond proceeds at only 1.63%. And if this concern comes to light, the village will have to pay back the investment earnings above the 1.63% bond yield to the U.S. Department of Treasury, and this is referenced as a rebate payment. The theory behind the IRS arbitrage rules is to ensure that agencies are ready to spend the bond proceeds when they borrow, And furthermore, that they're not asking for more than the amount needed. So I wanted to make sure that the board understood that while we want, obviously, to be moving forward with this project and making decisions, you should make the decision that you feel is the best. When the mayor asked staff to look at these alternatives, as I mentioned, all of them had at one point in time been identified. They weren't identified as the most cost-effective solution, but given the board's position as of the last board meeting, April 15th, and some division amongst the board on whether to proceed with this project or not, one of these options may garner some additional board support, and we thought it important to bring back the discussion before you this evening. So really, the question before the board tonight is, should staff continue as planned, or would you rather us explore one of these options in more detail, understanding that it will take additional time?
Thank you so much. And what does this do to our ability to get grant funds for other large projects like Latimer Lane, which is about $1 million flood project that we would need to get grants for, to pay for?
Well, I mean, if we're seeking grants for this project, this project would take priority, and other stormwater projects that we might identify in our capital improvement plan would have to wait.
So we'd be kicking the can down the road on those projects where people can't get out of their driveways and get to school and to work.
May I ask why the north conveyance
You're
option
out
is
of
not under
order.
discussion?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
May I ask?
John,
No,
Mr.
you are out
Brunke,
of order.
Mr. Brunke, I got a couple of questions.
Sure.
Why can't, some questions that some residents raised, why can't we move the water to Levitt Park?
Great question. I was going to mention it. Well, unfortunately, Levitt Park is uphill from the viaduct. You can't put the water uphill. Basically, it's way uphill. Yeah, we have to pump it up there to store it. They have to run right back through the viaduct. It doesn't make any sense to do it that way. It's not really an option. Plus, it's not big enough area for the storage. Another question that came to my know was regards to possibly putting some down in Highlands Park. We looked at that as well. It would be an additional $2 million of pipe to get the water down to Highlands Park, and that whole area is in the floodplain. Doing a basin there, don't even know if it's an option or a feasible option. We'd have to have that model. Plus, we'd probably lose the park unless they did underground detention there as well at an additional cost. So it would even cost $2 million more than the options we're looking at here behind the school or at one of the parking lots, or the parking lot or the Flossmoor Park. So.
Can you address the blocked creek rates?
Yeah, behind Alexander, yeah, we clean it up periodically, and probably needs to get done again. Most of that area is private property, and that ditch that goes behind those homes, unfortunately, a lot of the properties fall off, people dump back there, things happen, and a lot of the debris washes down. Pretty much, we probably clean that grade out 4 to 6 times a year, I'd estimate.
Maybe we could put something out to residents, just reminding them to take care of that area and that is their property. That might be helpful as well. I saw a lot of toys and whatnot that I've watched.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that washes down for the block area, unfortunately.
Okay. Why isn't this designed at a 100-year flood level?
Sure, probably 2 big reasons for that. The first being, probably the biggest, is space. The volume needed for 100-year flood protection. Looking at the same location at Heather Elementary School would take nearly the entire school property, including the building structure itself. And then, as you could imagine, with that additional space, that additional construction, greatly adding to the costs of the project.
So we're such a heavily built community, there just simply isn't space for it. And then the north conveyance option, which was the 100-year option, can you explain why that is not an option that we can consider?
Absolutely. So increasing the flow to that creek would greatly increase the flood elevation during the 100-year flood of that creek. Butterfield Creek currently has a lot of flooding problems for residents along the creek, and even, not even immediately adjacent to the creek, but nearby, both within the village of Flossmoor as well as that continues on downstream. So increasing that 100-year flow rate to the creek would raise the high water elevation of that creek by several feet. So we're talking, if water's approaching someone's house already, it's now over their house. And people who already have water in their house, it's that much deeper. Oftentimes when those floodplains, sometimes inches make a difference. So it's something that, would have major permitting challenges if it would ever be allowed. That's why we pursued the potential of detention at Flossmoor Country Club, where we could pipe the water, detain it, and release it at a slow rate to the creek, where similar to Heather Hill, just at a larger scale, to where it would not have that negative, extremely negative impact to the downstream creek. However, as we know, the country club owners do not participate.
Right, thank you.
I think the public, and so many of the public, don't realize Flossmoor Country Club, other than a certain portion along Western Avenue, is not a part of our village. So we don't have the right to go in and condemn it. We have to look within our borders. And that's something I've heard on the road. And when you say, you don't understand, it's not a part of the village, people are amazed. Well, but it's called Flossmoor Country Club since the beginning of time.
Unincorporated.
So that's our issue there. And when the ownership said, no, nada, never, it's no, nada, never.
Well, I went back and asked again.
I
I went back and asked 3 times.
bet.
And offered incentives, and they are not a willing participant, and that is their right as private business owners. As disappointing as that may be. We'll take some discussion, and then I'll ask for the board's feedback after we've had a chance to hear everybody's questions. I'll start with Trustee Driscoll. Any questions?
Yeah, I want to go over a few things, John. Now, we've been here, Ms. Lacey talked about going back 6, 7 years before the mayor was here. We had these discussions with large crowds of residents who demanded we get this water problem straight years ago. That's why we did the referendum. We listened to the engineer programs, tossed it back and forth for years. So none of these decisions are made lightly. But just for everybody's benefit, what's the difference between a detention pond and a retention pond? I hear the terms being used back and forth.
The general consensus of that is deep tension pond is a facility that's a dry bottom. Water comes in, it's detained, and then it goes away. A retention pond is a facility that has a wet bottom, so there's always water within the basin. Water comes in, it's deeper, or water comes up and goes back down, and there's still a lot of water retained within the basin. So,
And let's be clear, what is this one?
this is a dry bottom detention basin.
And I heard the estimates when we first ordered for this, and every time since then. How long after a major flood will there be water in that retention pond?
The water will drain down within 9 hours.
Excuse me?
Within 9 hours.
In 9 hours. This might be a question for John. Right now, what is the water, how long does the water stay in Mother Park?
It depends, typically it's in there for better part of a day almost.
Yeah,
Typically at least a day, sometimes longer, depending on how much is in there when it's full. So we've
Let's go to the delay, number
Yeah,
one.
I should note, with the current proposed plan, whether it be an open basin or a drinkable grade at Heather Hill, it'll be a gravity system like pump. We'll only have a pumping situation if we put something at the south, we rely on the Flossmoor Park site.
Flossmoor, I understand it, what you're saying tonight, the south, commuter lot, it's not gonna do anything, we have pipes that are underneath Berry Lane right now, correct? They're not connected to this system, because the system's not completed yet, correct?
Yeah, it basically is, it's connected to the existing storm sewer system drains, but it isn't connected to a storage system, yes.
So they can still flood. The project's not complete. They're good for a 10-year flood, but these major floods like we had a few years ago, when everybody was underwater, you would not be able to survive that in its present condition, correct?
No, they're gonna flood more than if we don't continue to do a basin for them, yes, or.
It's a 5-year flood reserve for the roads. They're trying to increase it to a 10-year.
Correct. All right, so going back to the delay, let's say we delay this a year and try to find $2 million somewhere, which I don't believe we even have the ability to do a referendum for the taxpayers for that, Kathy, do we?
No, you would have to get a referendum on in November at the very earliest, because the next election would be the following April. So there's an election in November, that would be when it would be on the referendum for additional funds for these additional projects, so that it would postpone it to next spring.
So delaying these projects, delaying this project in particular, and also puts back our resurfacing projects and the other flooding projects that we have lined up as well. That's the risk we run. Not the risk we run, we will have to sideline those projects while we look around for an extra $2 to $4 million.
And what are the chances that we can find another 2.5 to 4? We've got 5 funding sources, I think, already.
6 on this phase, but if you count Prairie Lane, we're getting 9 funding sources.
Yeah, I'd say there are several more programs that we're pursuing at the time. The village, is written up there. I've done a lot of these projects. I go to the local and national stormwater conferences every year. I've never seen a project with 9. Usually 2 or 3 is like, we got a lot of support for this. 3 and 6, 9 total is I've never seen anything like it. So it's amazing. It's wonderful for the village that we've been able to get that much support. I think that to me would suggest a bigger hill to climb moving forward for more, but there are a couple more venues that we're pursuing.
We've been working hard.
And that's all my questions for now.
Thank you. One of the things that we didn't talk about, uncontrolled water. There was a story out in North Texas this weekend where a car was stranded in floodwaters on a street, and the parents and the 4-year-old child tried to climb out of the car, and the 4-year-old child was swept away by the floodwater and drowned. Can you talk about the difference between the cars that get stuck at the viaduct when there's extreme flooding, potential dangers for that, versus a controlled area taking the water away from homes and streets?
Certainly, I think that was kind of the emphasis of this whole project, is that currently the village has flooding. We're not creating flooding, we're not creating this body of water. We're attempting to move it from an uncontrolled location to a more controlled location. At the viaduct, right next to the Flossmoor Park, the Metro, major thoroughfare for traffic, pedestrians, bikes, your business district, all right there within this uncontrolled environment. I believe it was at the school board meeting where Assistant Fire Chief made a comment that they have multiple times had to go out and rescue people from the viaduct because they drove into it, didn't realize how deep it was, and they got stranded. To me, it appears to be a pretty significant safety concern. And the whole idea of this is to take that issue and move it to a more controlled environment. Yes, obviously putting it underground would be more controlled and safer, but there is a cost to that. And we talked about that from the very beginning. We have to work with the funds available, and we're able to find the solutions on Open Basin that meets with, land within the funds available. So right.
Thank you. I'm concerned about that risk for children as well. Trustee Lofton.
I live in an area that has 3 retention ponds, which are full of water as we speak, and 1 detention pond that I'll honestly say I've never seen water in it. So I'm starting to get the whole technology behind detention and retention. And based on the voices I heard tonight, it sounds like our job here is to manage something for the entire village as a whole. And we've been talking about this for 4 years now, on how to do that. People have been essentially suffering the tragedy of it. like 2019, we don't want to see that again, we can do something about it. So, I'm hearing, and over the last few weeks, I've heard a lot more about stop the flooding. That's our job. We got to stop the flooding.
Thank you, trustee Mitros.
There's a borrowing component, and when this all got going, we knew that we couldn't max out our limit. We had to save some room in there, which is prudent financial planning. So we went with the $10 million, and when this got underway, and it was before 2019, where we had these discussions, we talked about, because you can't just do 100% of the stream, it would kill the neighbors downstream. We talked about just a big pipe all the way to Butterfield by Dixie Highway to hold it, but that meant tearing up Flossmoor Road all the way to Dixie Highway for a good amount of time, and it was a lot more expensive. And at the time, I think I was in favor of that. I think I was the only person that was in favor of that, but anyway, so we came up with this solution because we had roads, we had sidewalks, we had a lot of other things that we needed because, you know, it's hard to find money. We don't stop and not do anything. The suggestion of number 4 is not quite true because we stopped this project, but we start looking for other projects to do because there are plenty of areas in Flossmoor that flood. And I've been to them, going back up private road 1 and 2. It's a lake when it rains. It's terrible. Along Grassy, over in the old section. So there are other parts. So that's kind of a misnomer because we're going to keep moving to mitigate flooding. The one suggestion is half detention, underground detention, and half having a detention pond. Doesn't make sense to me because the big argument is that they don't want that. Nor the argument that let's take it over to Levitt. Well, let's take our problem and move it over there. What, don't those people have the same issues? They obviously don't because no one's been to this meeting. So I don't know what the right answer is. I'm still, you know, I know what the constraints are. I know where we've been, and we picked the best solution that we had. And I still think it's the best solution. So I don't know what else to say.
Thank you. Any questions, trustee Bredesen?
Yes, I do have some questions, and pardon me, I think it's always good to have perspectives and hear multiple sides of a problem, of a situation, so we can garner further information to make an informed decision. I think the Ramseys said it best, and another gentleman, in that we, as the board, want to do the right thing for all of Flossmoor. We're not here for the businesses, we're not here for the residents, we're here for everyone. And so we need to come up with a solution that has the mind space for everyone. And so, as we see, it's not a clear-cut decision on how we arrive at what is the right thing to do, what is the thing that benefits everyone. So I just want to put that out there, that we do understand that. We also, I believe, understand that time is of the essence, and we have constraints on the funds that have been provided to help us make various decisions with the viaduct flooding and the neighborhood flooding and so forth. I think, as I mentioned in the last board meeting when we were together, that when we started out on this mission to resolve the flooding in the viaduct, it incorporated part of Berry Lane. And we did engineering to find out what that would include and how to resolve the overall problem with the viaduct. There were only a few solutions, to my understanding, right, that eliminated the problem altogether. But those solutions are not viable ones due to funding and the storage of the water. And being a landlocked community, we are limited to our options. So when we talk about including Heather Hill as part of that,
Heather Hill was not the designated space that we were focused on. It was an option, but not the option that we were likely going to go with because we had other options available on the table. And so I heard from residents many, many times that they were unaware of Heather Hill being part of the decision. And so when people understand the effects of what is being done, then they have more questions. And I've gotten tons and tons of questions from both sides on how we arrived here. So my question is, Mayor Nelson just mentioned that there was an incident with a child in Texas where there was flood waters. Can you speak to the viaduct plan? And is there a plan that eliminates the viaduct from flooding at all? Because that has been part of the questions that have been raised.
So I guess I would say there is no feasible option to eliminate the viaduct flooding with the alternatives considered. Meaning the north conveyance route straight to the creek would cause significant increases to downstream flooding.
Did you say less than 1/10 of a foot in February 2021?
Excuse me.
As well as the option to mitigate that increase in flooding with the detention at the Flossmoor Park facilities available. Can I say there's no options? We could put storage all over the place in every park and buy out homes and put underground, greatly increasing the cost. So we could find something, not anywhere near the range of the cost that we're looking at.
So there are none of the options that are on the table eliminate the flooding for the downtown businesses at all.
Correct.
Okay.
And for the 100-year event.
For the 100-year event.
The plan is proposed eliminates the flooding for the 10-year event. And protects the businesses for the 25-year event, or I should say, restricts the flood depth to approaching the businesses of the 25-year event.
So in terms of the viaduct, how many feet is that?
7.28 John.
Excuse me.
Yeah, the elevation, I want to say it's 4-foot range from the pavement to the top of the curb in front of the Civic Center. I want to say it's around 4 feet.
Okay. And so with that plan, it is still impassable and a risk to the community.
So what we're considering, the 10-year protection is that the water is less than 6 inches deep through the viaduct of the tank, so it's passable for vehicles in the event.
Okay.
Safely passable.
Okay. So the water to the businesses would be just to the street, but not to the door, or just the 6 inches under the viaduct? For the 10-year
For
plan?
the 10-year, the water will only be 6 inches of the viaduct, so regular businesses.
Okay, so it won't affect the businesses at all? Okay, and it is safe for our
Not by
emergency?
overnight flooding.
Okay. And our emergency vehicles and so forth are able to pass that section? But it's not permissible for cars, or what was your estimation, either cars can get through?
Yeah, 10-year, regular cars will be able to pass through.
Okay. And so when we talk about the 10-year, moving it again to the basin or detention area at Heather Hill, that is the only option that when we're looking at what we have in front of us today, that's the only option that we're looking at, or the underground solution. But everything is at Heather Hill.
There were the options of the South Community Lot or Flossmoor Park underground retention there, each at about $12 million total cost. And those are for improvements, the same level of 10-year protection to the viaduct, but not increasing the prevailing protection beyond where it's currently at.
Okay. Thank you.
Trustee Bradley Scott, I don't know if this helps or not, but staff put together some numbers. Over the past 4.5 years, we've had 8 1- to 2-year storm events, 3 2- to 10 storm year events, And then only just one that was 44-year storm event, which was the 2019 flood. So just some things for Trustee Knight.
So wait, I'm not, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So the costs that we're looking at in the board packet, I'm sorry, the board packet that we're looking at when we were provided the number 1, number 2, and number 3, the additional cost for number 2, well, they're highlighted as additional costs. Is it hundreds of thousands or millions for,
So, I believe option 1 was underground at Heather Hill. To fully, with the detention fully underground, was an increase of $4.4 million increase.
Yes.
And the next best options, if you will, were both 12 million total, not in addition. So that would be the South Meter Lot and Flossmoor Park. So the 4.7 point, close around 12.5. So 12.5 total for the putting underground with Flossmoor. So they're, I'm sorry, putting underground at
That would benefit prevailing and viaducts for 12 million, it's just fine.
so number 2 is just Berry Lane? I'm sorry, just the viaduct, no Berry Lane, okay? So, going to the additional cost, I think I understood Attorney Ward to say that it's a possibility to go to referendum to ask for the additional money. So that isn't one of our options on here, but it is a potential option. Not that residents would go for it, but that would be an option, right?
In order, it's one method of funding, yes. But you have to do a referendum, you have to
Absolutely.
get a majority of votes.
And, again, just a discussion, we went to referendum for the 10 million because, can you explain kind of how we arrived at the 10 million? Because we didn't have a source in terms of where the water was going to go definitively at that time, right? So given that we didn't have that intel, would it be wise to ask the residents what they think about a referendum now that we have real information and we've heard everyone's concern? Would it make sense?
So just a little historical perspective, back in, before the flood in 2019, the village board was already considering a referendum solely for streets. And the bonds for the construction of the library would be falling off. And at $10 million, the impact to the taxpayer was negligible. So we were allocating $10 million solely for streets. And then following the flooding in 2019, when you were faced with a room full of people and upset property owners and flooded basements and upset businesses, understandably, the board said, we need to try to figure out how to stretch our dollars. And so we're gonna go to referendum for both streets as well as improvements to the viaduct. But the mission was clear in all of this, is that we were charged with finding as much grant funding as we could for the viaduct, because there is no grant funding to pave your streets. So we could only get grant funding to help support the viaduct, which would allow more bond funds to go towards streets and maximize our dollars to their fullest potential. And I think we've done a very good job of that.
I agree, I think we have. And so, given the room that we have, and the concern from both sides, residents and businesses, I wonder if it makes sense, since people understand
the dilemma and the problem, what that would mean. And to tack onto that question, we replaced one debt with another opportunity. And so the residents haven't seen an additional increase based on the $10 million referendum. It was money we were already paying back. We just moved it to a different source. So what would that look like? An additional $2.5 to $4.4 million in terms of what residents would need to pay back and the longevity of that.
You know, that's something that we would need to look at in more detail, and part of that also is going to be, how close we are to our debt, ceiling, our limit in borrowing. I think Trustee Michaels referenced earlier that the village consciously left some cushion there, but we'd have to go back and start taking a look at, you know, what, how much room we have, and then of course, you know, what the impact would be to the tax bill.
I think that is a worthwhile thing to look at, not that we are pursuing it, but it gives us an avenue of an opportunity, and we would be able to have that discussion openly, that we have real numbers, so that residents can see the benefit, the cost benefit of that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Daggett.
Thank you. So I appreciate having all of the different voices here tonight to get, and over the past meetings where the community's been here expressing their concerns, because I think it helps us to get a perspective on what the community as a whole is feeling. What I'm hearing is the community, for the most part, to ask us to consider a compromise. Compromises are not always easy, and we have to figure out how to make them work, but if we can, I think it's worth it. So I have some questions. One thing I did want to ask of you guys, because this whole 1 year, 10 year, 100 year flood, it's the worst terminology decision that the engineers chose to use, because it makes zero sense. From my conversation with John, maybe you guys can explain what is, because it translates to a percent chance in the next calendar year that an event of that level happens. So 100 years, a 1% chance, right? So if we have a 100-year flood tomorrow, the day after, we have a 1% chance again of that happening in the next calendar year. It's not just, well, we have one 100-year flood, and then for 100 years, that's it. No. So a 10-year flood doesn't mean every 10 years we have that flood. It means that there's, what, a 54 or 60% chance of that flood happening in the next calendar year, something like that?
It's, a 10-year would be a 10% chance in the given calendar year.
Okay, so
50-year would be a 2% chance in the given calendar year. 1 year flood is 100% chance that duration, that size of the storm that will happen in the given calendar year.
So the confusing naming of it is that these events only happen in this, nature doesn't do that. So in these situations, the day after we have a 10-year flood event, we can have another one that next day. And I think we had some that came within a couple of weeks of each other in the last few years. So that's a confusing, it took me a while to get my head wrapped around that, so I appreciate you guys explaining that. Go ahead.
I think the best thing is what Mayor Nelson mentioned too, is look at those numbers for the last 8 years or what's the ones we've had experience in town, and that kind of gives you a good picture of what we're getting. But it's getting worse every day, it's increasing, it's not decreasing, we all agree on that, so.
Okay. So a couple questions. Okay, so with the option of the split, where we put half of it underground and half dry basin, could that be done in a way that later it would be very easy to then, with additional funding outside of this project as a new project, for that dry basin to be added into this? Okay. What would happen if we negated completely and just did the half portion of the below ground? What kind of protection would that offer? Is it cutting it in half, or is it worse?
Well, are you proposing like maybe just doing half of the detention right now and then don't construct anything?
Just asking.
I can't say with any certainty, but I think it would be safe to assume roughly half.
So we'd be protected. So they wouldn't get that 10-year.
Developing half the volume.
So they wouldn't get
On
the
the
10
spot,
year.
the closest we do is assume roughly half.
Okay. So instead of 10 year, we'd probably maybe 7.5. So we're just
Let's
moving
say
instead
it's
of. Assumptions, right, no, I understand. Okay, if we did do the split system where half of it was below grade, the other half was dry basin, how far would it move, generally speaking, how far would it move that fencing away from the playground? Are we talking,
Yeah, it depends on how we configure, but in that scenario, though, we don't have fencing around the open basin, right?
Right.
Because the low grade is, there's no danger. Yeah, there's no way for everyone to get into it, or to open the manhole and climb in, which is fun.
yeah,
Kids, yeah, hold it down, maybe super painless. They have an structure on the tower, or you can hold it down, right, hold it down,
okay. And the majority of the additional cost of the split is just, it's the amount of money we would have to spend for the below grade concrete structures to go in, and it's pretty expensive. So the height of the fence right now, as I see in the drawings, it looks like it's about 4 feet tall.
6 feet.
6 feet tall?
That's a high school ordinance, so we.
Are we the ones that decide variance?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. So really, the board could choose to put a 10-foot high fence if we wanted to.
Yeah, you're gonna.
You have to allow that for everybody else too.
Can't do a special use or a special variance, it has to be.
We'd be redefining the code at that point.
Could we narrow that code?
Yes. Really.
Okay. Again, I'm just.
Unique circumstances and danger would be our rationale for it, so that the variance would have to be limited. You know, the problem is every time you give a variance, it opens up the sky to the world, so we would have to be very careful. We would have to be prepared to have second requests for such things, and we have to be prepared to defend those requests.
Could look like a prison fence.
Aesthetically, would not.
Yeah, so it would not be bleaching.
So I guess what I'm getting at right now is, you know, we're faced with, we gotta do something. Everybody who's here said, we gotta do something. And we gotta try and figure out what is the best thing to do. And I appreciate Mr. Chan, who was here, who talked about a lot of this stuff has to happen in stages. So can we look at this in stages and answer some of the safety concerns? Maybe it looks like a prison fence for 4 years until we can find more money to continue the project to put it underground. And can we find ways to work this project where we're handling some of the significant concerns that are there of the safety concerns. You know, when I was a kid, I could get over a 6-foot fence pretty easy. 10-foot fence is going to be some pause, especially if they were vertical. You know, it's going to be very difficult, especially a special needs child. Not that I'm an expert on that, but I would assume, I'm making assumptions here, I know I shouldn't do that. It'd be more difficult. I knew it would be unsightly, that would be unfortunate, but I guess I'm trying to find a compromise that we can present that really does consider the safety concerns, but also this is a lot of money that we have potential to lose that would affect potential money that we get in the future. I think both of those things are very real. It's also very real that if we lose one of our downtown businesses and they don't come back. I mean, it took us a long time to fill Caldwell Banker, and I was a part of the group that went into that space, so I knew what it took to even make that happen. It was a stretch. So to get a business to go into that can be very difficult, and that's going to impact everything, all the other businesses up the line. So I think there's a lot of things to consider with this. How do we find that compromise? And, you know, everybody's not going to be happy, unfortunately. I wish we could wave a wand and make that happen. I guess where I'm coming from is I want to take into consideration how can we solve for as many of these issues as we possibly can. And safety concerns are very real. The money concerns are very real. The safety of transversing, you know, a flooded viaduct is very real. So I guess where I stand on it is I would really like to see us address some of these safety concerns if we do move forward with the current plan, with how do we limit the access to that space. The unsightly thing, I'm, you know, if it's ugly, you know, I'll take a hit for that, right? It's ugly. With the safety thing, can we find a way of solving the safety issue, and then come up with a plan for the future. If we show that we've been responsible with the money that we've been given, we get this plan going, then does it make it easier for us in the future to say, that was the first stage of this project, now we're ready to go to the next stage of this project to get our green space back, to make it more safe, to get this fence down, put it underground, and then move forward with additional things in the future, because, you know, we have so much money obligated against your grants right now, getting more might be difficult. So I think that's where I stand, just trying to find a way, how can we address the safety concerns of the access of that? Because to me, that's the one that's the big one. How do we address the safety concerns of access to that for the 9 to 10, worst case scenario, maybe 12 hours, so that can't be easily accessed and make it safer. And I think, to me, if we can solve for that, and we can come together as a board and figure out a way to solve for that, to make sure that access is as limited as possible and make it as safe as possible, then I think moving forward with the current plan, because we've addressed the issue of the tennis courts being moved. That comes from, we've got some commitments from that. So I think some of these other things can be resolved. That's where I see it. Is can we have some discussion and find some ways to
For every detention pond in Flossmoor,
well,
or the other ones of.
well, what's the deepest Levitt case?
It's a lot of water. Yeah, it's more so than this one.
What's the depth of the one that
About
we're,
86 feet in length or so.
and what's the one that we're talking about?
12 feet.
12 feet. So that's a significant difference.
You got ground at 6 feet, you got ground at foot over.
No, I understand.
And the other thing I question is that, maybe 4 years down the road, we can come back and do phase 2, and maybe 6 years down the road from there, we can do phase 3. We have all sorts of, public works issues in Flossmoor. It doesn't work that way. We have to plan for the whole village. This can't be our, you know what I'm saying? It can't just be our
I understand.
pet project for the next 20 years.
No, I understand.
Right, so,
And that's kind of I think my point here is the fencing option is something that's kind of low-hanging fruit. That if we can figure out a way to make it safer by the fencing, the type of fencing, God knows there's been enough discussion of border fencing, there's options. It's what they want. There's options, so if we can look at that, and it's a nominal cost to the overall bid, maybe it costs us a little bit on our streets, but we get those fencing that we can present to people, say, hey, here's even the options of the fencing that we're looking at. So if we can communicate that and find a resolution to that, and then I understand that, it doesn't just work that, oh, no, next year we're gonna do phase 2. But I think it does address the main concern here, which is the safety issue. And again, I get that it's not the most visually pleasing thing, but it solves the main concern, and I think it's responsible to the rest of the village, who does have concerns with businesses, with other homes that are flooding. I don't think it's an option to do anything that does not include everything. I think that would be, we wasted our money if we did that, and we did a disservice to those residents over there. So that's kind of where I'm at. If we can explore some ideas on the fencing to see if that's something that we can come up with that would address more of those safety issues, and then have a commitment as a board, and obviously future boards are responsible to carry on if we commit something, but that we're going to make our best effort to go to a phase 2 on this and see what we can do. Again, that being mixed in with all the other responsibilities we have in the village.
A question, please.
Yes, trustee Lofton.
In terms of fencing, are we talking about a 10-foot fence?
Something to explore.
I mean, the whole idea
higher
is
than
for safety, right?
Yes.
6 foot, as you said, you scale as a young man yourself.
Yeah.
But will a 10-foot fence be safer?
I think to me, what it is the vertical posts, right? How high up the vertical go before you have it cross? And I think if we can look at that, I think we can, in a reasonable amount of time, probably come up with some ideas of what some solutions are and see if that's viable. And then that would solve for that issue.
And inside the fence, we're talking about the 12-foot basin.
Still having basin, but the fence is much more limiting to access to where the chances that someone could actually get in that 6-foot fences. I mean, I get over 6-foot fence.
And with regard to the variance, we have to go through that process. to
Yes, we
extend
have to
it.
be very careful, but again, the future would be, but 10, 8, jumping to 10, I think the same effect might be an 8.
Sure.
Which would be, 8 is still, project. But, you know, to jump to 10, I don't.
Right, but I think that's where the
In answer to
research.
your question, investigating it is my understanding.
Yeah, I think that's where the research will kind of give us some more clarity on that, and to me, just to be responsible to the concern that's there.
And the original request from other parents was 4 6-foot fence, which we agreed to, but that sounded like a reasonable request. And we can definitely look at other options too, if that would be more palatable. Trustee Brandon Scott, did you have something else you wanted to say?
Yes, are we able to see this? I like the way that you had it, John, in one of your slides where you provided the yes. The synopsis. It provides like a cost analysis benefit of if we're able to see all of the options like that and what areas it helps to resolve problems for, if this is one area versus two. Yes.
So I guess, to finish out mine, so my request would be, if we could do some research on the fence thing, and I like that idea, we could kind of have just kind of a whole, here's the breakdown of where it is, contribution, look at that, and maybe get that information on the fence stuff back and take a look and make a decision from there.
That just delays the project a year. We are right against where we need to be.
So would
But we can explore the fence option while we're moving forward.
Okay, so we could make a commitment to come up with the most viable solution for a safe fence to guard off that area, and then we can just make sure that we follow through with that as well.
Exactly.
Okay.
So my question then to the trustees, in August of 2023, we had a 6-0 vote to proceed with this project. We spent over $200,000 on engineering services based on this board's direction. We've addressed dozens of questions raised by Heatherville residents since late January and made some design changes to accommodate their concerns. One was adding fencing, and the other one was moving the detention to 55 feet from the playground, approximately the width of this room. So my question to this board is, are you willing to postpone this project and risk uncontrolled and significant damage to 50 homes in the project area and dozens of small businesses? Are you willing to risk the loss of existing grant funds, which would make any flood mitigation project impossible? Are you willing to risk the potential that we are unable to gain additional funding and back in the same situation next year and facing increased construction costs? Are you willing to postpone the next major road project until 2026 due to the fact that we will not know how much money we will have left over in our bond to put towards roads? And are you willing to delay needed flood projects in other areas of town to spend more money and more time on a project that does not improve the results? I'll start with Trustee Lofton. Excuse me.
Please do not interrupt. You are out of order, and we will have to ask you.
Thank you. You may stay as long as you can maintain decorum. Trustee Lofton, I'm sorry for the interruption.
Mayor, I am not willing to make those sacrifices that you indicated. I don't think that would be wise.
Thank you so much. Trustee Michael.
It would be a huge step backwards for this village, and I'm not willing to delay this.
Thank you. Trustee Johnny Bradley Scott.
I think that my opinion is the way that you phrased that question was very unfair in the way that you phrased the question. Because that was, the reason I say that is because it's not that if we don't vote that way that we feel that we should put the village in jeopardy or not. That's not, I don't believe, the question being asked, the correct question that should be asked. I think that based on the questions that I had, that there is still more discovery that is available, and we can still come back to the table and talk about another 20 years. And I understand that there are a lot of timelines, but I don't think that the question is whether we'd be willing to risk the money that is up in the air. We understand that the money is not guaranteed should we not follow certain timelines. And we understand that we spent, $200,000, but let me also clarify, because the way that you stated it was not 100% correct. The village board agreed to move forward on mitigation. That is what we agreed to move forward on, and I think that's what we're talking about here. The way that we are getting to the mitigation is the question mark. And I think that's what we're trying to resolve, is what is the best way to do it so that majority of our residents, because we're never gonna appease everyone, but majority of our residents can get behind what we're trying to do. And so I'm asking, because you did say that you wanted to bring it forward because of all of the concerns, for more time to answer some of the questions that are on the table.
Thank you.
Yes, so with a commitment from my fellow board members to address the safety issue of the fence, I do not want to delay the project if I have the commitment of my fellow trustees to make sure that we're addressing to our best of our ability, we follow through with that safety concern with the fencing.
I agree with trustee Daggett. I do not want to delay the project. Let's take as we're moving forward with everything on our timescales, our commitments to this construction thing. Let's double back with engineering, come up with some ideas on the fencing, and see if we can make that safer.
Thank you so much. There is direction for, would like to proceed, one would not. So staff, if you could please proceed, and with that consideration of fencing options, that we'd like to look at options for. Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you everybody for